The foal was starving, weak, barely able to stand. But no matter how many times the old rancher chased it away, it kept coming back. Every morning, he'd open his barn door, and there it was again, covered in mud, shivering from the cold, watching him like it was begging for something. At first, he thought it was just another abandoned wild horse. But then he noticed something terrifying. Tied tightly around the foal's leg was a dirty piece of cloth, and written on it were only 6 words. "Please don't let him find her." The rancher's hands started shaking, because deep in those mountains, there was only one man everyone feared enough to run from. Before the story begins, make sure you subscribe first, because this is where stories like this drop regularly. Hit the like button, share this video with your friends, and don't forget to press the bell icon so you never miss a new story. And comment below what you think happens next. I read your comments and maybe your idea becomes the next video topic. Now tell me, what topic should I bring next? A mystery like this, a survival story, or something even darker? Alright, now let's begin. The wind howled across the empty plains as the old rancher stepped out of his barn before sunrise. Frost covered the ground like a thin sheet of glass, and every breath that left his mouth turned white in the freezing air. He pulled his worn coat tighter around his shoulders and grabbed the rusted bucket sitting beside the barn door. Life on the ranch had become the same lonely routine every single day. Feed the horses. Fix broken fences. Avoid the town. Avoid people. After years of disappointments and betrayals, the old rancher preferred silence over company. But that morning, something felt different. A weak sound broke through the cold wind. At first, he ignored it, thinking it was just another wild animal wandering near the property. Then he heard it again, a soft, painful cry coming from beside the fence. Annoyed, the rancher walked toward the sound, his boots crunching against the frozen dirt. That was when he saw it. A tiny foal stood trembling near the gate. The poor animal looked half dead. Its ribs pushed against its skin, and patches of mud covered its thin body. One of its legs shook so badly it could barely stay standing. The foal's eyes were filled with fear, but it didn't run away when the rancher approached. Instead, it simply stared at him like it had been searching for him for days. The rancher frowned. "Go on," he muttered, waving his hand. "Get outta here." The foal didn't move. He stepped closer and shouted louder this time, trying to scare it away. Most wild horses would bolt the second a human raised their voice. But not this one. The tiny creature only flinched before lowering its head weakly. The rancher sighed in frustration. He didn't need trouble. Especially not strange animals showing up in the middle of nowhere. Food was already scarce during winter, and keeping another horse alive would only make things harder. He tossed a small rock near the foal's feet. "Move." The foal finally staggered backward before slowly disappearing into the fog beyond the fence. The rancher shook his head and returned to work. But later that afternoon, when he returned from repairing the north fence line, he froze in place. The foal was back. This time it stood closer to the barn, shivering violently beneath the falling snow. The poor thing looked even weaker than before. Its legs wobbled as if it might collapse any second. The rancher cursed under his breath. For the next 2 days, the same thing happened again and again. Every time he chased the foal away, it somehow returned. Sometimes he found it standing near the water trough. Other times it waited silently outside his barn door before sunrise. And every time he looked into its eyes, he saw something strange. Not wildness. Not aggression. Fear. Real fear. On the 3rd morning, the rancher finally noticed the wounds. Long marks stretched across the foal's side beneath the mud and dirt. Some looked fresh. Others had already scarred over. The injuries weren't natural. Someone had hurt this animal badly. The rancher's expression darkened. Slowly, he carried a bucket of water toward the foal. The tiny horse hesitated at first before desperately drinking like it hadn't touched water in days. As the rancher knelt beside it, he reached carefully toward the rope hanging around its leg. That was when he noticed the dirty piece of cloth tied tightly beneath the knot. Confused, he untied it carefully and unfolded the fabric with rough fingers. The words were barely readable. "Please don't let him find her." The rancher stared at the message as cold wind swept across the ranch. Then he slowly looked back at the terrified foal. And for the first time, he realized this was no ordinary lost animal. The rancher barely slept that night. The note sat on his wooden table beside an old lantern, its dirty fabric stained with mud and dried blood. Every few minutes, he found himself staring at the words again. Please don't let him find her. Who was her? And who exactly was hunting her badly enough to send a starving foal running across frozen plains alone? Outside, the wind rattled the barn walls while snow continued falling across the empty ranch. The foal rested quietly inside one of the old stalls, finally warm after days in the cold. The rancher had wrapped blankets around the tiny horse and cleaned some of the wounds on its body. Up close, the injuries looked even worse. Deep cuts marked its legs, and older scars covered its back. Someone had abused this animal for a long time. By sunrise, the rancher made up his mind. He saddled his horse and rode toward the nearest town nearly 15 miles away. The ride was long and silent except for the sound of hooves crunching through snow. Most people in town barely spoke to the rancher anymore. He kept to himself, avoided trouble, and only visited when he needed supplies. But this time, he needed answers. As soon as he entered town, something felt strange. People stared at him nervously. Conversations stopped when he walked past. The old rancher noticed whispers spreading between shop owners and workers standing near the street. He ignored them and headed into the small general store. The woman behind the counter looked surprised to see him. "Haven't seen you in weeks," she said carefully. The rancher placed the dirty cloth note on the counter. "You ever seen this before?" The woman's face immediately changed. Fear flashed in her eyes for only a second before she quickly looked away. "No," she lied too fast. The rancher leaned closer. "Don't do that. Not with me." The woman swallowed hard but stayed silent. Frustrated, the rancher grabbed the note and turned to leave. But before he reached the door, an old voice stopped him. "Where'd you get that cloth?" An elderly woman sat near the back of the store beside the stove heater. The rancher recognized her instantly. Martha Green. She had lived in the town longer than anyone else. He walked toward her slowly. It was tied to a foal's leg. The old woman's hands began shaking slightly. "That little horse," she whispered. "Brown coat. White mark near the eye." The rancher nodded. Martha closed her eyes like she had just seen a ghost. "She's alive then." The rancher frowned. "Who?" The old woman looked around carefully before lowering her voice. There was a young girl staying near Black Hollow Ridge. Couldn't have been older than 16. Quiet girl. Kept to herself. But she loved horses more than anything. The rancher listened closely. "Few months ago," Martha continued, "people started noticing injured horses disappearing from nearby ranches, starved horses. Beaten horses. Somehow they'd vanish during the night. And later they'd be spotted healthy again. Hidden deep in the mountains." The rancher stared at her. "The girl was rescuing them," Martha whispered. "Especially from one ranch." A cold feeling crept into the rancher's chest. "Whose ranch?" The old woman hesitated, then finally spoke the name everyone feared. "Calvin Turner." The store suddenly became silent. Even the people nearby stopped pretending not to listen. Calvin Turner owned thousands of acres beyond Black Hollow Ridge. Rich. Violent. Untouchable. Rumors about him had spread for years: abused workers, dead animals, missing people, but nobody ever challenged him. People who caused trouble around Turner usually disappeared. The rancher looked back at the note in his hand. "What happened to the girl?" Martha's eyes filled with sadness. "She disappeared 3 weeks ago." Outside, wind slammed against the windows. The rancher felt something heavy settle in his stomach. "The foal belonged to her," Martha said quietly. "That little horse followed her everywhere." For a moment, the rancher said nothing. Then suddenly he remembered the fear in the foal's eyes every time it heard loud sounds. The way it kept returning to his ranch no matter how many times he chased it away. Like it had been sent there for a reason. As he left town later that afternoon, the foal's strange behavior replayed again and again inside his mind. When he returned home near sunset, the tiny horse was waiting beside the barn door. The moment it saw him, it let out a nervous cry and began pacing anxiously. Then it turned toward the distant tree line beyond the ranch and started walking. The rancher narrowed his eyes. The foal stopped briefly and looked back at him, almost like it wanted him to follow. The rancher grabbed his lantern and rifle before following the foal into the growing darkness. Snow crunched beneath his boots as the tiny horse hurried ahead, limping slightly but refusing to slow down. The wind howled through the pine trees surrounding the ranch, carrying an eerie silence across the mountains. "This better not be a mistake," the rancher muttered under his breath. The foal kept moving. For nearly an hour, they traveled deeper into the forest beyond Black Hollow Ridge. The path became rougher with every step. Broken branches covered the ground, and old horse tracks disappeared beneath fresh snow. Several times the rancher considered turning back. None of this felt right. A missing girl. A terrified foal. Calvin Turner's name connected to all of it. Trouble followed stories like these. And trouble was exactly what the rancher had spent years avoiding. But every time he slowed down, the foal would stop ahead of him and look back nervously, almost begging him not to quit. Finally, they reached a narrow clearing hidden between tall trees. The foal suddenly stopped. The rancher lifted his lantern higher and felt his stomach tighten. An abandoned cabin stood in front of them. The roof sagged beneath heavy snow, and one of the windows had been shattered long ago. Half-broken fencing surrounded the small property, while deep scratches marked the old barn doors nearby. Someone had definitely lived there recently. The rancher approached carefully, gripping his rifle tighter. The cabin door creaked open the moment he pushed against it. Inside, the air smelled cold and damp. A small fireplace sat in the corner filled with old ashes. Torn blankets covered the floor beside empty cans of food. The rancher slowly scanned the room while the foal wandered nervously near the doorway. Then he noticed something strange. Drawings. Dozens of them. Pieces of paper were scattered across a small wooden table. Most showed horses. Injured horses. Thin horses with scars across their backs. Some drawings even showed a large dark ranch house surrounded by fences. The rancher picked one up carefully. In the corner of the page, a name had been written in shaky handwriting. Emma. So the missing girl had a name. As he searched deeper through the cabin, more signs of her life appeared everywhere. A small coat hanging near the fireplace. Horse medicine stacked beside the wall. Buckets filled with brushes and feeding supplies. And photographs. Old photographs of horses covered in cuts and bruises. The rancher's jaw tightened. Whoever Emma was, she had been trying to save these animals. Then his eyes landed on one final drawing lying partly beneath the table. It showed a tiny foal standing beside a girl with long dark hair. Above them, written in faded pencil, were the words, "She's all I have left." The rancher slowly looked toward the foal standing behind him. The tiny horse gave a weak cry. Suddenly, everything began making sense. Emma had rescued the foal after losing its mother. She'd hidden it here while secretly caring for abused horses stolen from Turner's ranch. But somehow Calvin Turner had discovered what she was doing. And then she vanished. The rancher felt guilt crawl into his chest. For days he had tried chasing the poor animal away while it desperately searched for help. A loud noise outside suddenly shattered the silence. The foal jerked its head upward instantly. The rancher froze. Voices echoed faintly through the trees. Men. Several of them. Then came the unmistakable sound of horses approaching through snow. The rancher quickly lowered the lantern flame and moved toward the broken window carefully. Through the darkness, he spotted lights moving between the trees below the ridge. Riders. At least 4. The foal backed away nervously, breathing harder now. Then the rancher heard a voice carry through the cold night air. "Spread out. She couldn't have gotten far." Another rider answered. "Turner wants the girl found before morning." The rancher's blood ran cold. Emma was still alive. And whoever these men were, they were hunting her. The rancher quickly blew out the lantern. Darkness swallowed the cabin as the voices outside grew closer. Snow crunched beneath approaching horses while beams of light moved through the trees surrounding the ridge. The foal trembled violently beside him. "Easy," the rancher whispered softly, placing a rough hand against its neck. Outside, one of the riders shouted again. "Check the cabin!" The rancher's heart pounded hard inside his chest. He quietly stepped toward the broken window and peeked outside. 4 men on horseback were spreading across the clearing with rifles in their hands. Their heavy coats carried the same brand burned onto Turner's cattle. Calvin Turner's men. The rancher cursed silently. He had spent years staying away from problems exactly like this. Years avoiding dangerous people and violent fights. But now somehow he stood in the middle of both. The foal suddenly tugged against his sleeve. The rancher looked down. The tiny horse kept pulling toward the back of the cabin. At first, he ignored it. Then the foal did it again, more urgently this time. Confused, the rancher followed as the foal limped toward an old wooden shelf near the fireplace. The animal nudged the wall behind it repeatedly with its nose. The rancher narrowed his eyes. Slowly, he pushed the shelf aside. Behind it was a narrow hidden doorway. Before he could react, the cabin door burst open. "Someone's here." Flashlights swept across the room. The rancher instantly grabbed the foal and slipped through the hidden entrance just as boots thundered inside the cabin. He pulled the shelf back into place behind him, sealing them inside complete darkness. For several seconds, he barely breathed. Voices echoed from the other side of the wall. "Search everything. She can't be far." The rancher carefully lit a tiny match. A narrow underground tunnel stretched ahead beneath the cabin. Dirt walls surrounded them, supported by old wooden beams. The passage looked handmade and barely wide enough to walk through. The foal immediately started moving forward. The rancher followed silently. Above them, muffled footsteps continued shaking the cabin floor while Turner's men searched the property. But deeper inside the tunnel, another sound slowly became clear. Breathing. Weak breathing. The rancher stopped instantly. At the end of the tunnel sat a small underground shelter hidden beneath the mountain. And inside it was Emma. The girl looked barely conscious. She sat curled beneath old blankets near a tiny lantern, her face pale from exhaustion. Bruises covered one side of her cheek, and one of her arms had been wrapped tightly with blood-stained cloth. The moment the foal saw her, it rushed forward with a desperate cry. Emma's eyes slowly opened. For 1 second, fear filled her expression. Then she saw the rancher standing behind the foal. She tried reaching for something beside her, a small knife, but weakness stopped her halfway. "It's all right," the rancher said quietly. "I'm not with them." The girl stared at him silently, breathing hard. The foal pressed against her gently, and tears immediately filled Emma's eyes. She wrapped her arms around the tiny horse tightly like she thought she'd never see it again. "You made it," she whispered weakly. The rancher watched quietly before finally speaking. "They're outside searching for you." Emma's face turned pale. "I know." For a moment, silence filled the underground shelter except for the storm raging outside. Then slowly, Emma began explaining everything. Calvin Turner had been abusing animals for years. Horses too weak to work were beaten or left starving inside broken pens hidden deep on his property. Workers who complained disappeared quickly. Nobody in town dared challenge him because Turner controlled nearly everything around Black Hollow Ridge. But Emma had. After her father died working for Turner, she secretly stayed near the mountains and began rescuing injured horses during the night. She hid them inside the abandoned cabin and cared for them alone, including the foal. "The men found us 3 weeks ago," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I tried running." The rancher noticed fresh tears forming in her eyes. They killed the foal's mother because she couldn't work anymore. The tiny horse pressed closer against her. Emma swallowed hard before continuing. "I escaped through the tunnel, but they kept searching the mountains every day after that." She looked toward the foal sadly. "I sent her away with the note because I thought maybe someone would help." The rancher lowered his eyes for a moment, ashamed he almost turned the animal away. Then suddenly, a loud noise echoed above them. Footsteps. The riders had discovered the tunnel entrance. Emma's entire body stiffened in fear. The rancher slowly stood up and checked the rifle in his hands. Above them, angry voices shouted through the darkness. "I found something." The rancher looked toward Emma and the terrified foal beside her. Then back toward the tunnel. "They know you're here now," he said grimly. And for the first time in years, the old rancher prepared himself for a fight. The sound of boots echoed through the tunnel above them. Dust fell from the wooden beams as Turner's men forced their way underground. Emma backed against the wall, clutching the foal tightly while fear filled her exhausted eyes. The rancher raised his rifle slowly. 4 years, he had avoided violence. After losing his family long ago, he buried himself in isolation and convinced himself that helping others only brought pain. But standing inside that hidden shelter, looking at the terrified girl and the starving foal beside her, something inside him changed. He wasn't going to let them suffer alone. A flashlight beam suddenly cut through the darkness ahead. "There they are!" one of the riders shouted. Gunfire exploded through the tunnel. The rancher instantly pulled Emma and the foal behind wooden crates as bullets slammed into the dirt walls. He fired back once, forcing the men to retreat deeper into the passage. "Stay down!" he shouted. Emma trembled violently beside the foal, tears streaming down her face. The tiny horse pressed against her protectively despite its own injuries. Outside, thunder shook the mountains as the snowstorm worsened. The rancher quickly looked around the shelter for another exit. Near the back wall, he spotted a narrow escape path leading upward through the rocks. "There's a way out," he told Emma. "But we move now." Another shot echoed through the tunnel. The riders were getting closer. The rancher helped Emma to her feet while the foal stayed close beside her. Slowly, they climbed through the narrow passage as cold wind rushed down from above. Behind them, angry voices continued shouting. Then suddenly, a deeper voice echoed through the tunnel. "Move aside." The rancher froze instantly. Calvin Turner himself stepped into the underground passage. Even in the darkness, the man looked terrifying. Tall, heavy, cold eyes filled with cruelty. Snow covered his black coat while a revolver rested in his hand. His gaze locked onto Emma immediately. "You caused me a lot of problems," Turner said calmly. Emma stepped backward, shaking. The rancher moved in front of her. Turner smirked slightly. "This doesn't concern you, old man." "The girl's not going with you," the rancher replied. For a moment, silence filled the tunnel except for the storm outside. Then Turner laughed quietly. "You think anyone in town cares what happens to her?" he said. "Nobody's ever stopped me before." The rancher's grip tightened around the rifle. Maybe they were just waiting for someone else to stand first. Turner's expression darkened instantly. Gunfire erupted again. The blast echoed violently through the tunnel as both men fired almost together. Wood shattered around them while Emma screamed and covered the foal protectively. The rancher ducked behind the rocks, breathing heavily. Then suddenly, voices shouted from outside the mountain entrance. More people were coming. Turner heard them too. "What the hell?" Lantern lights suddenly appeared beyond the tunnel opening. Town riders. Nearly a dozen of them. Among them was Martha Green and several ranch workers who had finally gathered the courage to act after hearing the truth about Emma and the abused horses. Some carried rifles. Others carried ropes and lanterns. One of the men pointed directly at Turner. "It's over." Turner spun around furiously, realizing he was surrounded. 4 years, fear had protected him. But not anymore. The rancher stepped forward slowly while the townspeople closed in behind Turner's riders. One by one, the men lowered their weapons. Turner glared at Emma with pure hatred. "You should have stayed hidden." Emma finally found the strength to answer. "No," she whispered. "You should have stopped hurting them." Minutes later, ropes tightened around Turner's hands as the townspeople dragged him outside into the storm. His riders surrendered soon after. The nightmare was finally over. As silence returned to the mountains, Emma collapsed to her knees beside the foal. Tears poured down her face while she wrapped her arms around the tiny horse again and again. "We're safe," she whispered softly. "We're finally safe." The rancher stood nearby quietly, watching the scene beneath falling snow. For the first time in years, the emptiness inside him no longer felt so heavy. Several weeks later, winter slowly began fading from the valley. The ranch looked different now. Life had returned to the old property. Healthy rescued horses filled the barns while Emma helped care for them every morning. The once starving foal had grown stronger too. Its wounds healed slowly, and energy returned to its small body day by day. But one thing never changed. The foal refused to leave Emma's side. Everywhere she walked, the tiny horse followed closely behind like it knew exactly who had saved its life. One quiet evening, the rancher stood near the fence watching the sunset spread golden light across the fields. Emma laughed softly in the distance as the foal ran freely through the grass for the very first time without fear. The rancher smiled faintly. The starving little foal that nobody wanted had carried a desperate message across frozen mountains. And in the end, it saved far more than just itself.